seems to be someone was paid £10,000 because they were offended by a portrait of the Queen which was in their workplace. What was your reaction to that and the idea that someone could be offended by a portrait?
Well, I mean, I think when we think about the Queen, she's not just some cuddly old lady. She's not your nan. The Queen represents a particular version of history and the present. It is that she's the premier symbol of empire and colonial violence. In Northern Ireland today, with its history, which very recent history of trouble, I'm not at all surprised that somebody will be offended by a portrait of the Queen.
Is that true? It's there to put you in your place? A picture of the Queen in a government building, Sir Simon?
The constitutional settlement in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is that we are a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy. The Queen is the 41st monarch in 1,000 years of broadly uninterrupted history. One brief problem with Mr. Cromwell in his time. For the vast majority of people, the Queen does represent a huge stabilising force in politics. But she is the head of state.
It was a government building, wasn't it? And she is the head of state. It wasn't like you were working in a sweet shop. And
yeah, but again, we talk about head of state. The empire, like, she's also paintings of the Queen in the government buildings in Jamaica and in India. And it's the idea that just because some people in the UK are perfectly happy for that, you have to understand the colonial history of this. And this is, again, Northern Ireland.
Kehinde, quite a few people have already got in touch suggesting that there's a very simple solution. If there's a piece of art that's offending you, you just don't look at it. I mean, is that just a bit too flippant? Because, of course, I'd imagine that the portrait was there before this person started working there. So if this person's joined and then suddenly the portrait... we don't know the exact timeline of when the portrait arrived, but, the portraits are always there.
It's not there as a work of art. In fact, some of the pictures of the Queen I think she'd be quite offended by because I don't think they're very good.
Sure.
She's had thousands of pictures made by... But the piece of... the object in terms of either a work of art or a photograph is there because she is the head of state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
So if it's offending you, can you just not look at it?
No, I mean, we've come far too far. It's not 1940. We have workers have rights. And also a big part of this problem is we say we like Britain, we like to have people have their voice. Now that people are having their voice, the victims of colonial violence, black people, women, Irish people, we now say, oh, well, you're wrong. You shouldn't have that voice.
The situation is complicated in Northern Ireland, isn't it? There's plenty of people in Northern Ireland that would like the Queen to be there. It's a symbolic of some of the divisions, isn't it?
Because it's about, like you said, the Queen is there not just a work of art, it's there for a reason, and she's the head of state, and the reason it's a portrait is to revere her, and that does go with a particular line.
The portrait is not to revere her, the portrait is to put up the head of state. And the reality is, the Queen not only is the head of state, but personally, in her time, in 65 years on the throne, I think has made a huge impact on stability in this country through a time of huge political, economic, social, demographic change. And I have to say she is also actively very hugely influential in putting flesh on the Commonwealth and managing, yes, a difficult time in history, the post-colonial era, in a way that you will find vast numbers of people within communities who've come to this country and thrived hugely, have benefited from that stability. And there's huge popularity and huge public support within communities for the Queen.
Who would you put there instead?
Support for the monarchy never falls below 70-75%. Whatever happens with the politicians, the unifying role that the Queen brings is just, OK, it's a part of our history. But it is quite remarkable, and people, when they look around at presidential candidates and all other alternative forms of government, believe that, given our continuity of history, this is a very good way to handle
Who would you put there instead?
It's not about who would you put there instead. And just because the Queen's...
because there's a hole on the wall at the moment. So they're trying to decide what to hang there or not. Would you have blank walls? What would you have Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister?
At least I would say at least he was elected, but he wasn't, was he?
Everything.
No, but I think this is the point, though, right? I mean, just because the Queen's popular, and she's popular, like my nan had a picture of the Queen in her house, but the reason she's popular, particularly in the colonies, is because this idea that you must the Queen. The Queen is not brought stability. The Queen is a figurehead whose primary role is to remind people, I said, of their place. And this is why, particularly our generation, if you put that picture in picture of the Queen, I had to walk past it every day, I'd be deeply offended.
What about the idea, Kehinde, what about the idea that this person's received £10,000 in compensation for being offended? Because it seems that there's one thing to be able to turn around and say, I don't like this picture, could we take it down? But to get £10,000, if this is the start of that? Where does that stop? Is there going to be sort of a sudden affliction of offendedness?
No, I think it's very unlikely that somebody was given £10,000 just because they were offended. It's probably a much bigger issue, a bigger story. And part of that story is that when people complain about things which you don't think is we just tell them to shut up. It's like, you have a voice, but we're not going to listen to you. People are rightfully offended and that's what we have workers' rights.
Yeah, but then there's what has been anybody, anywhere. We know how you set a precedent. Anybody goes into any government building and suddenly says, I'm offended by the Queen's picture up there. I'm a Republican. Perfectly respectable position to have. I just don't happen to agree with it. Most of the British people don't agree with it. But this is ridiculous. What's next? We don't like the Union flag. We don't like the treatment of the colour.
The monarchy is a symbol of elitism, sexism, racism, and just because you're a civil servant, you're supposed to go, OK, let's not complain about it. I mean, this is madness. Surely if Britain...
We work in the civil service. We've got the highest employment rate in the whole of the European Union at the moment. There are many, many other jobs out there. I was very proud for 40 years to call myself, a crown servant. We were Her Majesty's Armed Forces, of which many people from all communities serve both in the civil service and very gallantly in Her Majesty's Armed Forces.
We don't know who the person is that has received the money or exactly the circumstances surrounding that compensation. They remain anonymous. Lots of people getting in touch. The vast majority agreeing with you, Sir Simon, suggesting that you should be offended by the Queen. I'm not sure why anyone would be. Philippa does agree with you, though, Kehinde. I totally understand why a picture of the Queen may be offensive. Her historical past is littered with oppression of many peoples. I don't like the aristocracy because it's hereditary, not a meritocracy, not the world I want my kids to live in. So people are falling on both sides of the argument.
The question I would ask is, if you take down the Queen, what difference does it make?
Well, that's what
why
I
are we
asked
defending
you,
the Queen?
You didn't have an answer for what you put
the question
instead.
is, but it's not about that. It's about why are we defending this image? If we take it down, what
would you put there instead?
And I think, actually, no, what the monarchy is... No, I'll give you the answer. The answer is... There must be... If we're saying that actually Britain has changed and that everybody's welcome, let's think of other images which represent modern Britain. And the Queen does not represent modern Britain. She's an anachronism that represents colonial
She
violence.
is the head of state, and therefore whoever was the head of state would have their image put up in government buildings and regimental messes and Parliament, etc.
The suggestion was the pictures could be the historic handshake between her and the leader of Sinn Féin in 2012, Martin McGuinness, or equally her meeting Northern Irish people. So still there, but in a capacity as the head of state, meeting sort of people rather than... And I think there's a formality about a portrait as well, though, isn't there? That does
then, as I say, you keep setting a precedent. Anybody who comes in claiming they are offended, we suddenly start dancing to the tune of individual people.
We change what we do because we recognise that people are offended by it.
Changed dramatically.
You two are not going to agree. I'm offended when I come in the morning. There's a massive picture of Ben Shephard.
Not big enough.
Right in front of the entrance.
It's not big enough.
It's not big enough.
No.
You want it higher.
It's bigger, louder, higher.
I'm always offended.
They haven't got enough money to cover your compensation.
Thank you very much, sir. A lot of people very involved in what you said.
Thank you, Kehinde. Thanks to Simon. Nice to see both of you this morning.